And this government analysis tallies with economic analysis by the London School of Economics, the National Institute for Economic and Social Research, big, serious forecasters. But the thing to remember with these things is that forecasts are not what will definitely happen. It's a judgment on what is likely to happen. And there has been some economic negative effect of the referendum, slightly slower growth. But it is up to politicians to drive the economy. Brexit isn't the only thing going on in the economy. So if there is better global growth, for example, the economy will perform better. And as Alex said in her report, no modelling of this new bespoke arrangement that the government says it wants because it's unique. Well, it's hard to model what is unique. So yes, the forecasts are negative, as have many others been, but it doesn't mean it will definitely be the outcome of where the UK economy goes.
All right, Kamal, thank you. Well, let's talk about those politicians and the politics as well. Our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, is following this lunchtime's events at Westminster. A pretty febrile day, Norman.
Indeed, with ministers insisting they are not going to publish this report, although it's worth bearing in mind that they were forced kicking and screaming just a few weeks ago to publish other analysis of the effect of Brexit on different parts of the economy. And you know, some Brexiteers are pretty relaxed about this report being published because it doesn't really tell us a vast amount new. There have been loads of economic reports warning of the potential woes of Brexit. The real political hoo-ha over this report is the fact it was leaked because it was only given to those right at the top of government, and in a sign of the tensions in Tory ranks, some Brexiteers are suggesting it was leaked by those who want to scupper the chance of a radical break with the EU, because it is suggested in the report that would be the most damaging outcome. And it is implied that perhaps those sympathetic to the Chancellor, who suggested we only wanted to diverge very modestly from the EU, are perhaps behind this. And the real fear of the Brexiteers is maybe the Prime Minister is beginning to go along with the Chancellor's views. And their fear is they end up with what they call Beano. No, that is not a reference to Lord Snooty and his pals. It refers to Brexit in name only. In other words, we leave the EU, but really not much changes.
Norman, thank you. Norman Smith there at Westminster. A review carried out by the auditors PwC has found no gender bias in pay decisions for on-air staff at the BBC, though its report said the corporation's approach to setting pay in general has been far from perfect. The BBC has set out a 5-point plan to help create what it says will be a fairer and more equal organisation. The Director General, Lord Hall, says some highly paid stars will see their pay cut, while some women and men will be paid more. Our media correspondent David Silito has the details.
When Carrie Gracie resigned as China editor earlier this month, it was in protest about pay. She said a comparable male editor was being paid more than 50% more than her. And she's not alone. Eleanor Bradford was a health correspondent in Scotland for 15 years.
While there were one or two who'd been in the job longer than me, there weren't many people who had been longer than me. And also, while I was there, I saw male specialists being appointed on starting salaries that were higher than mine.
The response? A number of top male stars have already agreed to take a cut, and today's independent report has looked into whether pay decisions at BBC News were based on gender. The answer to that is no, but there is a gap. So, overall, a pay gap of 6.8% between men and women, which is less than it is for the BBC as a whole. But there are some other findings in this report. For instance, at the very top, there are more men, and it says they're paid too much, they're going to have pay cuts, and a number of women are going to have pay rises.
What I've laid out today is a package of measures from a framework by which presenters, whomsoever they are, can see where they're placed versus their peers, narrowing the bands in which they are paid, so that's clearer too, lowering some pay for some men at the very top, but also looking very hard at the pay for women and men at the lower levels, where actually the pay has been too low.
But there are serious doubts about this report and its findings from the women who've been campaigning for equal pay.
BBC Women has had to reject this report because we were really hoping to be consulted on its scope and on its methodology. That did not happen, and it's hard to reach any other conclusion other than the conclusion that this report has reached the conclusion the BBC wanted it to reach.
And also the report doesn't cover the BBC's really big earners in entertainment. It's just a survey of news. And one reason for that is news isn't as competitive as it used to be.
Pay rates for the sort of star journalists are way over the top, in my view, in today's market. And I think that's clearly being addressed. The rest of the situation is much more difficult because it's highly subjective who's got the same level of job as somebody else.
The BBC says it wants to be a leader in equality and to reduce the yawning pay divides, but convincing BBC women that it's truly serious about pay equality, it's still got work to do. David Siletto, BBC News.
Well, our media editor, Amal Rajan, is with me. And the point about the PwC report, Amal, is given the size of the BBC, it's looking at really quite a small number of people within it.
It is. It's the third report the BBC has commissioned on this whole issue of either gender pay or equal pay. But this PwC report, Jane, only looked at 824 presenters, correspondents and editors within BBC News. So it didn't look at the whole of the BBC. And of course, one of the issues here is that when that list of salaries was published last summer, there's a huge number of names that weren't on there that earn a lot of money from the BBC because they're paid by independent production companies. So we still have far from a full picture about what top earners at the BBC are getting. It's worth saying that Tony Hall's 5-point plan, which you mentioned, and which Tony Hall in that clip in David Silito's package also talked about, I think has conveyed the impression that he is trying to get a grip on this issue. And I think even the BBC Women's campaigning group says that actually Tony Hall has got good intentions and he has taken a control of this issue. But I think they're far from satisfied that actually this is going to address not just current disparities, but historic wrongs. There are a lot of grievances from a lot of people who feel that over years they've accumulated a disadvantage. And so when Carrie Gracie, the former China editor who quit her post as China editor and is returning back to London, quit in protest at unequal pay, she's in front of the Select Committee tomorrow, along with Tony Hall and other senior executives. I think this whole story is going to flare up yet again. And I suspect that far from this report being the end of the story, it's merely the end of the beginning.
Amal, thanks for now. Amal Rajan. The Metropolitan Police and the CPS have apologised to a man accused of rape after a review found that mistakes were made in the disclosure of evidence, which resulted in the trial against him collapsing. 22-year-old Liam Allen had been accused of rape and sexual assault, but his trial was halted after police were ordered to hand over phone records. Our correspondent Danny Shaw is at Scotland Yard. Explain more then what has finally happened here with the police and the CPS, Danny.
Well, Liam Allen was arrested on suspicion of rape in January 2016 and his alleged victim's mobile phone was seized by police. It contained 57,000 lines of data. The officer in charge of the investigation searched through the data looking for relevant material but could find none. It was later found that he hadn't conducted the search properly. He hadn't recorded how he'd conducted the search, and it wasn't until December last year, that's almost 2 years, under which Liam Allen had been under investigation, that relevant, important material was found amongst those messages that undermined the prosecution case and led to the charges against Mr. Allen being dropped. We've had an apology for Liam Allen from the Metropolitan Police and the Crown Prosecution Service, his commander, Richard Smith.
We accept, the Met accepts and the CPS accept that we failed to identify this error early enough, and we really should have done. And that's why I've apologised to Mr. Allen. That's why we've initiated a review of the other cases we have that have got past charge and are running towards trial to ensure that there are no other errors within those that should be addressed.
That review is looking at 600 cases in London. They've already identified 500, and they found some cases which are giving prosecutors cause for concern. As for the detective in the Liam Allen case, he hasn't been disciplined because Scotland Yard says that there was no evidence of misconduct on his part, but he has voluntarily agreed to move to other duties. He will not be investigating sexual assault cases.
Danny Shaw, thank you. Police believe a series of violent burglaries over the last 3 years have been carried out by a man with an armed forces background. Detectives say one man is suspected of carrying out raids in Berkshire, Kent, Sussex and Surrey, in which valuables worth £1 million in total have been stolen. Police say the raids have all had military-style planning. Frankie McCamley reports.
Caught on CCTV, the burglar police believe to have military training or involved in law enforcement. Detectives say in each of the 7 raids he's shown signs of specialist knowledge and skills, staking out his targets for weeks, studying their movements and where they keep their valuables before he makes his vicious move.
He hit me 3 times on my face. It was very, very painful and I couldn't believe the blows kept coming. And so I took him to the jury. I gave him the jury. It was very frightening. But he actually said to me, "Get on the floor." I actually thought he was going to rape me. I was very, very frightened.
The intruder has stolen jewellery, valuables and heirlooms worth in total more than £1 million.
We believe this person is not an amateur burglar. We think that this is somebody who has specialist skills. He uses firearms and cable ties to do this, and he has an immense amount of planning and prepping before he goes and commits these offences.
Despite the Ministry of Defence saying it's working with the police on the investigation, it has asked for more evidence, stating, "We are unable to share DNA taken from personnel before they're deployed on military operations, as it's restricted under data protection. If service personnel are convicted of a crime or are under suspicion, DNA records are shared with the police."
There are trade crafts which we generally will only see by individuals that have specialist or former military experience, which include identifying patterns of life of the owners of these properties, looking at the arcs of the cameras and their locations, to even the methods of entry.
The suspect has targeted affluent homes in Berkshire, Kent, Surrey and Sussex over a period of 3 years. Police say the burglar must now be caught to prevent further harm coming to anybody else. Frankie McCamley, BBC News.
A man accused of murdering one woman and attempting to murder another had years earlier offered an undercover police officer the chance to drug and rape one of his alleged victims, according to evidence heard in court this morning. Mujahid Arshid denies killing Celine Dukran and trying to kill another woman who can't be named for legal reasons. John Donnison is following the case at the Old Bailey. A deeply distressing case. John, explain what was heard in court.
Well, today the prosecution wrapped up their case against Mr. Arshid, and it came in what they call bad character evidence. And as you say, this is an allegation that in 2013, Mr. Arshid was caught up in a police paedophile sting with an undercover officer posing as a paedophile on a website that the police say is used by people with a sexual interest in young people. And the allegation is that Mr. Arshid offered to provide a teenage girl to this undercover officer so that she could be drugged and raped. He also then sent photos to this undercover officer of the woman who now alleges that she was raped and was attempted to be murdered by Mr. Arshid. I should say that Mr. Arshid denies all the charges. He says that someone had managed to access and hack into the router in his home to carry out this chat with the undercover officer, and the Crown Prosecution Service at the time in 2013 decided that there wasn't enough evidence to bring charges. We did actually get onto the defence case today. Mr. Arshid appeared in court and he said that the principal witness against him was a compulsive liar and manipulator. The trial continues.
John Donnison, thank you. The time is 19 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. The impact of Britain leaving the EU could see the country substantially worse off, according to a leaked government report. Coming up in the programme, saying farewell to one of football's greats. Fans pay tribute at the funeral of the England and West Bromwich striker Cyril Regis.
Coming up in the sport in the next 15 minutes on BBC News, Arsenal are closing in on Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang and that could spark a number of deals before the transfer deadline tomorrow.
Creative arts subjects are being cut back in many secondary schools in England, according to research carried out by the BBC. 9 out of 10 schools which responded to a survey said they had reduced classes, staff or facilities in at least one of these subjects. The findings from more than 1,200 schools suggest music, art and drama and design and technology are all being squeezed. The increased emphasis on core academic subjects and funding pressures were the most common reasons given, as Joe Black reports.
The creative arts, they've been part of the weekly timetable for decades. But for how much longer? In the last few years, head teacher Jez Bennett from Northamptonshire has had to cut arts lessons, resources and staff, and is teaching some of the classes himself.
I've had to make some decisions about whether I can afford to run certain classes, and I know that there are schools that have cut GCSEs in art, music, drama, photography.
I just wanted to be able to have the chance to express myself.
I came to school with no art curriculum. I couldn't see myself enjoying it as much.
Jobs these days mostly rely on your core subjects like maths, English, science, and that is a lot of pressure.
The BBC approached every state school in England asking about their arts provision. 40%, that's more than 1,200 schools, responded. A third said they'd cut the number of lessons in at least one arts subject in the last few years. A quarter said they now employ fewer specialist teachers. And a third are considering dropping at least one arts subject at GCSE. So why is this happening? Schools say the key reason is the government's focus on core academic subjects such as English, maths, the sciences, languages, history and geography. Ministers want schools to ensure more pupils sit these subjects at GCSE. School leaders say pressure on funding is also a major factor.
Then you will bring the chain to her yourself.
No, bear it with you, lest I come not in time.
This Shakespeare Festival gives pupils all over the country the chance to perform on a professional stage. But increasingly, schools have been dropping out because they can't afford it or they don't have enough staff to take part.
You must have the thing out of dust.
Being a creative member of society means that you are more confident. It means that you communicate better. It means that you work better with people of very, very different backgrounds to yourselves. And those are things that are absolutely crucial structures in a society which faces the kind of difficulties and problems that we face.
The government says schools are required to provide a broad and balanced curriculum which Ofsted consider in their inspections. It also says it's investing £400 million in music and arts education programmes. But for most schools in our survey, cuts to the arts are not over yet, with more expected in the coming years. Joe Black, BBC News.
On the eve of the annual State of the Union address, the man who briefs President Trump on security, the head of the CIA, has warned that China presents as large a security threat to the US as Russia. In an exclusive interview with our security correspondent Gordon Carrera, Mike Pompeo also said that Iran should stop interfering in regional conflicts.
At CIA headquarters, Director Mike Pompeo has a long list of intelligence targets. Allegations of Russian interference in American politics have been high on the agenda, but he told me that he was just as worried by Chinese influence.
We can watch very focused efforts to steal American information, to infiltrate the United States with spies, with people who are going to work on behalf of the Chinese government against America. We see it in our schools, we see it in our hospitals and medical systems. We see it throughout corporate America. It's also true in other parts of the world.
Including Europe and the UK?
Including Europe and the UK, of course.
Another priority, says the CIA director, is confronting Iran in the Middle East and beyond.
Are you worried about the level of Iranian influence in Syria and the region?
Yes.
And are there ways in which you feel you can counter that?
Yes.
You're not worried that particularly the tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia could lead to some kind of conflict?
Very worried about it. We need to make sure that that doesn't happen, and the way to do that is to ensure that the Iranian people understand that this can't be good for them. We saw the protests these past weeks. The Iranian people understand that these adventures which cost the Iranian people tens of millions of dollars and present risk to their lives to fight in Yemen, make no sense. The history of Iran is deep. The Persian people have a deep understanding of how to be successful in the world. I hope that they will rise up and understand that it's not in the best interest of their country to send forces to places like Europe as proxies to try and conduct malign activity in Europe when there's so much that can be done to make Iran a better place. We're confident that the Iranian people understand that. We are hopeful their leaders will accept that proposition as well.
As he enters his second year as CIA director, Mike Pompeo knows that the challenges, including in Washington itself, are unlikely to diminish. Gordon Carrera, BBC News, Langley.
As the Prime Minister flies to China, a major Chinese employer in the UK has warned Theresa May that she needs to give a definite signal about the kind of Brexit deal she wants. The billionaire department store owner, Yan Yifei, who controls the House of Fraser chain, said the UK government needs to provide reassurance about its departure from the EU. He's been talking to our China correspondent, Robin Brandt.
British things with an unmistakable British feel on sale in a distinctly British place. But this House of Fraser is in China, in the home city of the billionaire who now controls the British retail chain.
Why did you want to buy British?
Yuan Yafei has 17,000 staff on his books in the UK and a major interest in Britain's future, including, of course, Brexit.
The government need to give the people the definite the signal how to solve and can confirm this problem. I think is very important.
Is your business in the UK going to be better outside of the European Union? Worse? What do you think?
影响实际是有的，但是这个影响，我觉得最主要的是进程的确定性不明确。这个给了一个确定性以后，实际退欧以后也不见得就差到哪去。
Being bought by a Chinese company is a surefire way to get access to this country. For many other British firms, though, it can be a very, very challenging experience. One way in, though, is this. This Thomas Cook China ad is touting tailor-made trips. Some send wealthy football fans to Premier League games. But the firm's been forced into a joint venture, one of the foreigner complaints about market access in China. They're opening up in some ways, though. The UK has a new deal to send more pigs trotters here. Step by step, the government's aiming for incremental trade deals with China in the post-Brexit world. Robin Brandt, BBC News, Nanjing.
The funeral has taken place of the former England and West Bromwich footballer Cyril Regis. The striker, who died earlier this month at the age of 59, was widely credited with inspiring a generation of black players into the game. Our sports correspondent Andy Swiss reports.
It was the fondest of farewells. At the ground Cyril Regis graced as a player, they gathered in emotional tribute. A private family funeral to be followed by a public celebration of his life, a chance to say goodbye to a footballing hero.
He saw no difference in anybody, and all he wanted to do was play football. And as a young black man, he led the way.
He was a remarkable footballer and a man, and I love him. I just love him.
Regis taking it well on the chest.
Few footballers have inspired such warmth.
Oh, and what a great shot!
With his dignity, determination and dazzling goals, Cyril Regis blazed a trail for black British footballers. Well, for the thousands of fans, friends and family gathering here, this is a chance to celebrate a remarkable life of a player, but also a pioneer, a man who helped change football. Among the music and tributes, one of his former teammates spoke of his strength and spirit.
We played at a time when black players had to endure much vile racist abuse, yet Cyril never lost his cool. Nor was he ever intimidated. He always said that it motivated him to play even better. He left us with great memories, and for that we are blessed to have known him. Nice one, Cyril. Nice one, son.
Cyril Regis's daughter Michelle then paid her very personal tribute.
A legend, a gentleman, the 3 degrees, Big C, the many different names you had. But I couldn't be more proud to just call you my dad. But I too one day will leave this place and return into my father's open arms and forever remain in his loving embrace.
A day then to remember a man who touched so many lives, a fitting tribute to a footballing giant. Andy Swiss, BBC News, the Hawthorns.
Remembering the remarkable Cyril Regis. Let's turn our attentions to the day's weather prospects now. Ben Rich has joined me. Hello, Ben.
Hi, Jane. Thank you very much indeed. It was a chilly start for many of us.